Hello Ekans, in this video I'll be giving you guys the best DPSs for each weapon type in Genshin Impact. I'll just bring up a couple of contenders for each weapon type, and then I will choose the best DPS that will represent this weapon type. We did the same video idea for the elements in Genshin Impact if you want to watch it, and in this video I'll be doing the same for weapon types. Before we continue though, I just want to do some assumptions. It's pretty much the same thing we did on the previous video, but I just want to remind everyone of the assumptions I'm going to be choosing characters with. Obviously we're going to be picking the highest damage output, so if a character has super high damage, obviously this is going to be a big reason to pick them, but this is not the only factor we're going to be taking into account. We're also going to be taking into account the constellations of the characters, so we're mostly going to be assuming they're C0 to C2, which is like low constellations. Anything above that I don't think is realistic because majority of the players won't have it, so it wouldn't really matter as much. C2 would be the maximum I would consider for a character in these videos. And then finally, the ease to achieve this damage. If a character does have very high damage output, but it's just super high to achieve for whatever reason, whether it's like very limited teams, whether it's just like super high constellations, as I said before, super hard rotations and stuff like that, I'm also going to take that into account. So if a character does have like close damage to him, for example, but they're much easier to achieve, then in that case, I'll just pick the other character. So yeah, just keep that in mind. The biggest damage numbers are not the only factor in this. They're the most important one, but they're not the only one. All right, with that being said, let's just get right into it. Alright, so starting off with the sword users, the main DPSs we have in this weapon type are going to be Alhaitham, Clorand, and finally Ayaka. All of these are going to be dealing super good amounts of damage, but in terms of like who has the highest damage between them, I'd probably just go with Alhaitham. Clorand is also going to be a close second, maybe even a little better in some teams depending on the team and the situation, but in general, I would pick Alhaitham for the most consistent highest damage output, even at C0 to C1. I think Ayaka lacks a little behind both of them, so we'll immediately just remove Ayaka from this race. Her damage output is just not going to be consistent or close to both of them. She's also going to be a little clunky, which is bad. Talking about the clunkiness between Alhaitham and Clorand, they both have not like the easiest playstyle. Alhaitham, you need to do like some strict rotations and stuff like that to be able to achieve the highest damage numbers for your team. With Clorand, she has the whole like bond of life mechanic and she cannot heal and stuff like that. She also has a short damage window she can do her damage in, which can like squeeze your rotations. So I don't think any of them is like super comfortable to play, but I do think Alhaitham is less uncomfortable to play than Clorand, at least in my personal opinion. So yeah, Alhaitham does deal a little more damage than Clorand. He also is a little more comfortable to play than Clorand, and for these reasons, personally, I'll just pick Alhaitham as the best sword DPS we have in the game right now. Alright, now moving on to the second weapon type, which is going to be the Claymore. The main Claymore main DPSs we have in the game right now that are at least worth considering in my opinion are just going to be the newest Natlan characters, Moika and Kinnish. The rest of the other Claymore characters just have much less damage in my opinion, so I don't even think they're qualified to be in here in the discussion. The discussion would just be between Kinnish and Moika. Now between these two, I think Moika does deal more damage in general than Kinnish, and I also think she's kind of simpler to play. She's not the simplest to play, but her playstyle is definitely much more simpler than Kinnish's playstyle, in my opinion. I mean, I personally do like his playstyle, but that's just like very subjective. Some people hate it, some people love it. Moika's playstyle is much more just like simpler, unless you just hate her on a motorbike. But talking about like her actual playstyle, you just press the buttons and that's it. You don't need to move to any areas or nothing like that. Another factor though is gonna be their teams. They both have kind of limited teams though, so it's not like Kinnish does have like super versatile teams or anything like this, but Moika does have more restricted teams than Kinnish in my opinion, but she still does have some good free-to-play Natlan characters that you can use with her, especially if you ever see one that's going to be less of a problem. And for that case, I think I just pick Moika as the best main DPS Claymore user in the game right now. I think she's just worth it. I can see how some people might argue Kinnish is, but personally I think Moika just wins it pretty clearly. Now, moving on to the third weapon type, which is going to be the Polearm. I think the main contenders for this are going to be Arlecchino, Hu Tao, and Zhao. So for these characters, all of them do deal like great amounts of damage, but I do think Zhao does less damage than both of them in general, even for his recent teams. He's getting pretty close there, but I think there's a clear difference between him and especially like Arlecchino. I think Hu Tao does still deal more damage than him though, so I think I would just eliminate Zhao in this competition. If we're comparing Arlecchino Arlecchino and Hu Tao. In terms of like teams, I think they do have pretty much the same sort of teams, so that's not really a problem in terms of like versatility. When it comes to ease to play, they also not the simplest characters to play. With Hu Tao, you need the whole, you know, charge, animation cancel, stuff like that. And with Arlecchino, you have the whole bond of life thing. But in general, I do think Arlecchino is a little simpler to play. At least for me, I just really don't like Hu Tao's playstyle. I never liked it from the beginning of the game. I do think Arlecchino does deal more damage than Hu Tao too. So I think Arlecchino will be a clear winner and the best polearm DPS in Genshin Impact. Want a polearm user that's a good main DPS, I think Arlecchino is probably going to be the main option for most people. Now, moving on to the fourth weapon type, which is the bow. We have two main contenders in this only, in my opinion, which are going to be Line and Chaska. Even though we only have two, I think this is probably the most fierce competition between all weapons because they're going to be very close and comparable, and it's going to be very hard to pick one of them. The reason is they both do deal similar amounts of damage, give or take. Obviously, it depends on the team, which enemies you're facing, how many enemies you're facing, stuff like that. But in general, I do find them having like the same amount of DPS in general for their main teams. Their playstyle are very different, but then also very similar, though both of them use the charge attacks playstyle. So if you hate that, then yeah. But they do use charge attacks, both of them. So this is also very similar. In terms of like which of them is harder to play, personally, I find Chaska easier to play, but I don't think that's really like an objective opinion. I think it's just preference really. So in comparison, I just count them as both having like the same level of like difficulty and playstyle. So I don't think this is a factor. Now moving on to the things that might separate them, I think the best thing Line has over Chaska is going to be his consistent damage. Chaska's damage is going to be kind of random to say the least, and that's never a good thing for a main DPS. You want to know how much damage you're going to be dealing with like precise numbers. RNG is never good. I mean, even though she's going to be clearing most stuff anyway, so it doesn't matter, but you don't really want to rely on RNG because you don't know what elements you're going to be dealing damage with, so you can't really build on that too. A lot of times you need to go like an attack goblet and stuff like that, and depending on which enemies you're facing, they might have like different resistances and stuff like that, and this can change like the efficiency of her damage depending on which element the bullets are. So her damage is going to be less consistent than Line's. Line's on the other hand is just pirate damage. His just going to be dealing the same amount of damage every time. You can expect it. So that's a +1 for Line. I think the only thing that Chaska has over Line is going to be her AoE potential. It's technically not even AoE. She just deals damage to multiple targets, which is even a problem for her RNG because sometimes they just deal damage to the wrong enemy. But that can also be a good thing if you have like so many small enemies and stuff like that. Then you're dealing more AoE damage, which is decent, I guess. With Line, he's like very strictly a single target character, which is not a good thing. With all of that being said though, personally, I would pick Line as the best bow DPS. I do understand there's a big argument for Chaska though. I already didn't pick her as the best Anemo DPS the other day, and a lot of people attacked me for that, so I know a lot of people will be mad here, but personally, I just think Line takes the best like stable bow character DPS. Even though his damage might be slightly less than Chaska sometimes, but I think his damage consistency, his sort of easier playstyle, even though that's debatable, and his kind of like simpler teams, I think this helps him take the lead as like the best bow DPS in the game right now. Let me guys what you think in the comments. And now finally moving on to the last weapon type, which is going to be the Catalyst. We do have kind of a fierce competition here too. We have Wriothesley, Neuvillette, and Mulaney. I think those are the main contenders for Catalyst main DPSs. So between those, all of them deal good damage. Obviously, that's why I picked them as contenders. But I do think Wriothesley lags a little behind both Neuvillette and Mulaney, mainly because of the cryo meta right now. But in general, he's definitely not able to put the same output as both of them. But I think I'll just remove Wriothesley. Now between Neuvillette and Mulaney, I think they do have the same, or at least close to the same damage output. Mulaney can outperform sometimes if you have like the right team, the right rotations and everything like that. But I also do think Neuvillette is much more easier to play and also has much more consistent damage with also simpler teams to build, and he's also easier to build and more free-to-play friendly, at least in my opinion. So with all of these, I personally do think Neuvillette is the best Catalyst DPS we have in the game right now. Mulaney is definitely a close second, so I do understand that. But personally, I think Neuvillette is just much easier to play, much easier damage output to get, and it's almost the same damage as Mulaney, and even better in some cases in teams. But yeah, tell me your guys' lists in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. Leave a like, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.